Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me in this session, and thank you to the Open Group and Mega for inviting me along. Very much appreciated. Um, Quickly to introduce myself, Dan Meadows. I'm the Head of Enterprise Architecture and Requirements at NATS, which is the UK's National Air Traffic Service provider. I'll give you a very brief intro into them, but then we'll get into the detail of what I'm going to talk about. 15-20 minutes is not very long, so we won't go into a lot of detail, but hopefully there'll be something useful in there for you. Apologies that I can't be there today, so I'm not in the background on the chat. This is a pre-recorded session, but I am very keen to get any comments or questions offline, so please feel free to pop them in the chat or to reach out through LinkedIn, and I'd be very keen to engage and follow up on that. So very quickly, who are NATS? We are, as I say, air traffic control providers in the UK. We're split into two parts. The NERL side of the business, which provides the regulated under license to the Civil Aviation Authority for all the traffic transiting through the upper airspace of the UK, and NSL that operates on a more commercial basis and competes to provide the service for airports and things like that. We also provide services to the MOD, to other governments, airports, airlines, and things around the world. So that's roughly who we are. We are a very complicated business, it's a very complex system of systems architectures that are required to support the operators in providing that service. And so an ideal sort of business to be to leverage the benefits of enterprise architecture and things like that. So quick bottom line up front, this isn't one of those glowing success stories of how everything's been wonderful where we are. There are some ups and downs. It's a journey, and we're not there yet. But hopefully, with those positives and negatives, there are some lessons that you can take from our experiences. So basically, we're here to share those. So what were the challenges we are and were trying to address by introducing a more architecture-driven approach? So historically, change in NATS has been delivered in project silos through traditional waterfall approaches, as it has in many places. And what we found with that is that the strategic alignment has been too ad hoc. We've kicked things off in pursuit of a high-level strategy, but over time they've drifted. We've not maintained that link or followed it through, checked it that it remains the case, and so you end up with pet projects and things like that. And 5 years down the line, not really delivering what we set out to deliver. We also find that making things aligned between projects or even within projects is totally reliant on the knowledge inside subject matter experts' heads. And if they don't realize that changing something over here needs to change something over there, then it gets missed and it gets picked up too late when it's much more expensive to fix. We've also had an inconsistency in approach, that we basically reinvent the wheel each time to a greater or lesser degree, and we don't reuse everything we've learned, both in terms of process and in terms of content. And as a result of that kind of siloed way of working, you find you build up an over the fence kind of culture that people will work on their little area, do their job, throw it over the fence to the next people. And by not involving people at the right time in the right way, you find that problems pop up late. People don't have chance to see things and realize that things might be going in a wrong direction. So we want to pull that forward and get more people involved and basically create the opportunity to identify issues earlier when they're cheaper and easier to fix. We've also had a tendency, like many businesses, to focus too much on the technology aspects of things and to be totally reliant on textual shall statement kind of requirements. And therefore, we've focused more on the internal user, the people that are actually hands-on with the technology, more so than the external customer that we ultimately provide our services to. We focus more on the functionality within the black box that it provides and the HMI, rather than the broader process that it's there to support, and understanding that, and where actually procedural solutions or training solutions might be just as good as technology. But even if not, that we understand how the users are going to interact with each other and things like that, rather than just that one-way interface between the man and the machine. And we've also picked up some lines of development too late. You missed training till too late in the day, or you don't bring in human performance, safety. People are not involved at the right time. And ultimately, all of that leads to excessive clarification, rework, and long story short, more money, more expense, and sometimes not delivering what was actually needed in the first place. So what were we doing to try and address these problems? About 4 years ago, we embarked on a program of introducing what we called strategic portfolio management, and underpinning that a business change framework that brought together best practice across multiple things. So not just the architecture requirements side of things, but also program management, portfolio management, project management, change management, benefits management, all of which have their own sort of best practice guidance. So for architecture, we use TOGAF, but we also used the managing successful programs for program management and that whole Axelos suite, and different standards. And you find that they will talk about the same things using subtly different language. And to avoid duplicating content, we needed to harmonize that and bring it together. So that's what we were trying to do with our business change framework. So TOGAF, as I say, a key part to that from an architecture side of things. And we early on realized that enterprise architecture was absolutely fundamental in such a complex business where the kind of problems that we were seeing. So the architected approach will help us by breaking down those silos, by focusing not just on an individual application, but on the broader capabilities and high level services that it supports. By enabling us to put in place that traceability that supports staying on top of your strategic alignment. And if that's top to bottom, there's also the left to right traceability that enables us to provide better coherence and better ability to impact the analysis of change and make sure we pick up where a change over here is going to impact something over there. It doesn't do it all for you, but it definitely helps in that process. It also then enabled us to provide requirements that came with context and understanding, both for the people validating that we've captured them correctly, and for the people charged with delivering against them. If they can see where the individual shall statement fits in the broader process, they're more likely to understand it and be able to deliver it. A big part of introducing TOGAF was pushing the business away from that technology focus and forcing us to think through that business level architecture, including as well things like the training and support functions that sit around the sort of core business aspects. And then finally, thinking through early the how we integrate that change, and this is where the best practice integrated between architecture and change management things came in, to really think through, well, how's this going to be rolled out? How's this going to be transitioned into service? How's it going to be tested when it's delivered? Those sorts of things. So it was all going rather swimmingly. We were in a pretty good place 2 years ago. We'd worked through the methodology. We'd recruited some specialists, trained them up in the way that we were wanting to implement it, and started to deploy this on some of our big transformation programs. And then, of course, COVID hit, which had a huge impact on the aviation business, as I'm sure you'll all be well aware. And that flows through down to us in the air traffic providers. So if our airlines are not flying aircraft and the airports are not landing and taking off aircraft, then there's a lot less work for us to do, and that ultimately impacts our revenues. And we have a lot of pressure from those stakeholders to pull back on the work that we're doing and save money, the same as large swathes of the economy. So what we did as a result was we shelved some of those big transformation programs and focused very much on the, if you like, keeping the lights on, the sustainment programs and the sort of legacy programs that were already in train. But we paused the longer term investment programs, which were the main vehicles for rolling out this new approach to architecture and requirements and business change framework. So that caused us a bit of a problem. We also lost a lot of capacity to really implement change. We built our team in the knowledge that we built it around deploying on the large transformation programs. We'd scaled it to that, but we didn't really know how many people we would need. So we brought in a lot of contractors to give us that flex. Of course, when the pandemic hit, the contractors were the first to go. The team shrunk dramatically. We farmed off people to support those more sustainment things, and basically we had no capacity to develop this is how it could work, this is how it should work. We focused entirely on the fires of today, and so capacity to really introduce any big benefits disappeared. But at the same time, big drives within the business to find efficiencies to save every penny everywhere we could, which fundamentally meant we needed a change in strategy for how we were going to go about rolling out enterprise architecture. So our revised focus became about initially that tactical intervention, use our people, use our skills, use the little bits and pieces, the techniques that sit around our area to improve where we could the ongoing sustainment activities and legacy programs. We also found that we'd built up in our team quite a bit of business analysis capability. That did become important as there was a lot of organizational change going on, so we found ourselves supporting that. But in terms of really building the enterprise architecture capability, our focus shifted to building the foundations, and in particular, the business wanted to be more service oriented, and so needed to better understand what that really meant, something more than just changing the names of organizational elements and that kind of thing. Really getting to the bottom of our understanding of, well, what are the services we're talking about, and in particular forcing that understanding that it's as much, well, ultimately it's all about the business services that we deliver to our customers, not the underlying information system services that support the users. So we needed to put together language around that, and we spent a lot of time working with stakeholders to say, well, what is the structure of that taxonomy of services, from the business services through those enabling sort of more technology services, and what are the actual enumerations of those. So how do we talk about it all in the same way to avoid talking past each other, to avoid duplicating effort, inconsistencies, and so on. And then putting the roles and accountabilities around that so that people knew what they were ultimately responsible or accountable for, make that a lot clearer. That gets very muddy between the operations side of the business, the technology side of the business, and particularly when we have operational from a regulated side of the business and from the commercial side of the business, ultimately driving requirements on the same underlying technology. So really forcing through the understanding of that, very important. And then setting a pragmatic ambition for what it was that we're actually going to model under that. We all know the dangers of trying to model the world. You could model all these things. It's very powerful if you do, but it takes a dramatic amount of time and effort. And that resource is simply not there in the business. So leveling up to something that is useful, provides a return on investment, but is affordable and achievable. So that was building that language itself first and foremost, but then using it to develop service roadmaps, and integrating through the strategy and benefits into it. But essentially a thinner layer, broad but thin layer across the top that gives us that strategic aspect to it and manage the capabilities at the top level, rather than requiring us to go really way into the details of the programs at this time, which is just not possible. But fundamentally, it's all about connecting the dots around the business. We have lots of people around the business that know the merits of architecture, trying to push in the right direction, but all hampered by finding that none of them have resource individually, and also by pushing on independently, we all develop subtly different solutions that don't tie up. So we spent a lot of time over the last 2 years just getting the right people together in the room, understanding what we're trying to do, and build that commonality that enables us to connect things, perhaps not in the most effective, long-term, efficient way, but even in a quick and dirty way. At least if we're talking together, we can start building that architecture. So ultimately, we're still heading for the same place. The long-term end remains the same, but in the short term, broad but shallow rather than deep, big chunks. Very much about pulling together what we've already got and understanding that, and only delving deeper where the opportunities arise. Much more in the near term, focusing on those quick wins, if you like, where we can. And also avoiding talking about EA as such. Someone in my team brought this up, that the first rule of Architecture Club is don't talk about architecture, because it does sadly have a tendency to alienate senior stakeholders. They perceive it to be really complex, really expensive, and just not doable. And we have to basically, it's easier to sell what you're doing, the benefits you're going to get, rather than branding it as architecture. It just doesn't help us. So we largely avoid using the term where we can, to be honest. So just to summarize, really, the last slide, There were a number of negative impacts from the pandemic. The business very much moved into cash flow being king rather than value for money, which is very contrary to the sort of investor save underpinning that you need to develop a true enterprise architecture capability. We also had an awful lot of organizational change, particularly at the leadership levels, and that meant that we had new stakeholders that weren't familiar with what we were doing, that hadn't been part of that process of setting all this up 4 years ago, and we needed to buy them back in. And that, I will be honest, has been a real challenge just because of that time that you have available to do it. And there's also a natural tendency within the business, and I suspect many businesses, to under pressure revert to type, do what we've always done the way we've always done it because we understand it. We know the pitfalls of it, but it's easier to plow on like that than it is to invest time and money and pause things to do it properly. And that's a real challenge to fight against. But ultimately, as they say, we're still on the same path. It will take time to rebuild, but the key to getting there is still as it was. We need to build that really clear vision, spend the time with the stakeholders to spell that out, and that vision needs to be built on demonstrable benefits and shorter term return on investment in the current environment, and ultimately need the very pragmatic path to build step by step to that long-term goal. And the really biggest thing that I find is take the time. It's difficult, but it's really worth that investment. If you're going to cut on anything, do not make it the stakeholder engagement. That is what will make or break your endeavours. So appreciate that was a real quick canter through our story. I'd love to go into more detail on it with any of you that are interested and to share your experiences and learn from you. Hopefully you found it useful. Again, apologies I'm not there, but please do pop questions or comments in the chat or reach out on LinkedIn. I'd be really keen to speak to you. So thank you very much for your time today, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of your time at this event. Thank you very much. Cheers.